threat from our side. From our side, we are committed to contribute to sustainable peace and development. Preparations for these events, including the outcome document, speaks to that in particular. So now, please allow me to introduce my good friend, Ambassador Jukka. Ambassador Jukka Salovaara. It's now really my pleasure to bring you in here. He is the permanent representative of Finland to the United Nations. I would like to express my gratitude and sincere appreciation to you, Ambassador Jukka, the mission, and to the mission, of course, through you and the entire Finland Ministry of Foreign Affairs for being such a critical partner to the network of religious and traditional peacemakers and the larger international community in striving to advance peace and security, sustainable development, and realization of human rights. We are delighted to have you. The floor is yours, Ambassador Jukka.
Thank you so much, dear friend Mohammed. It's such an honor to provide some introductory remarks to this meeting. And I was just reflecting that for someone like me who started his working career with a typewriter, so connecting with you to Sudan sort of seems quite extraordinary and we are so well connected nowadays. Let me just say that how much we appreciate the work of the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers and KAICIID, and thanks for bringing us together. And you really do important work, and that's why the Finnish mission and Finland is so honored to partner with you. And of course, today we are discussing promoting grassroots efforts for sustainable peace and development. And this is sort of I feel, a very natural mission for religious and traditional leaders, because, well, there is also a strong ethical dimension to sustainable development, because it is about equity. We know that too many inequalities sort of exist between and within states, and the COVID-19 pandemics has only made things worse and laid bare sort of some of the basic sort of injustices of the present state of affairs. And of course, sort of sustainable development is also about sort of intergenerational fairness. And I think that this is very much sort of high on the agenda of religious and traditional peacemakers. And that's why, from my point of view, a role in promoting the grassroots efforts for sustainable peace and development is only natural for this network, and because peace and development are so closely interlinked. And from my perspective, what traditional and religious leaders can bring to the table of sustainable development. So I think that the first and foremost issue is inclusion. We know how important inclusion is to make for many processes, be it sort of sustainable development or peace. And in many cases, well, religious and traditional leaders can really speak for their communities and sometimes also give a voice for the voiceless. So inclusion is really an important and fundamental element for making any progress, and this speaks very much to the interconnectedness Dr. El Sanoussi was highlighting in his remarks. So it is really an honor to sort of give these introductory remarks, and I wish you well, and of course sort of, well, we look forward also to working more sort of with the network in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Jukka. I'm just trying to see if I can put my camera back again here. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your remark, and again for your commitment and support. And you recall, Ambassador Jukka, we discussed this particular initiative in your residence almost over 2.5 years ago. And our hope was really to bring religious actors from the grassroots to New York personally, but we had to do some alternative because of the pandemic, but we are committed to continue in the future as well. So now really I'm delighted to welcome to the floor again my good friend and the co-sponsor of this event, His Excellency Faisal bin Muammar, the Secretary General of KAICIID. The network has been extremely grateful to you, Faisal, and to KAICIID. Your partnership has become invaluable for us and to the efforts to empowering global religious and traditional actors to cultivate peace at all levels. I would also like to express my appreciations to you and your team for collaboration in today's events. So, His Excellency Muammar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much. And I would like to greet you from Riyadh. I am in Riyadh now, and the temperature outside is almost 48 degrees. So just think about us. I don't know how much is it in Sudan. Thank you, Your Excellency, Ambassador Becca, for your thought-provoking remarks on the central role of faith and traditional actors for sustainable development. In your role as a co-facilitator of the Ministerial Declaration for the High-Level Political Forum, we thank you also for your continued support in strengthening sustainable development through multi-sectoral partnerships. And I would like to thank Dr. Sunusi and the network for the impressive work you are doing. Also, we would like to thank the UNDP, and we are really happy to be a partner in this event. Your Excellencies, dear friends, it is a pleasure to join you today, even virtually, and to welcome you to this event. The High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development this year carries a special urgency. I want to take a few minutes to echo urgent call for action. The COVID-19 crisis has indeed revealed and worsened vulnerabilities and inequalities within and among countries. It has accentuated systematic weaknesses, challenges, and risks. It threatens often even reverse decades of progress in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The global poverty and hunger have increased as a result of the disruptions to economic growth, supply chains, and livelihoods. SDG 3, good health and well-being, has grown even more distant. I am speaking here of the millions of missed medical appointments, surgeries, vaccinations, but let us not also forget the toll on mental health, especially of health and safety workers, SDG 8. This decent work, SDG 10, reduce inequalities, even perceived again on SDG 13. Climate action turned out to have been false as we deal with rising climate worldwide. I want to focus here on SDG 16, peace and justice, and the strong institutions, and SDG 17, partnerships. The pandemic has taken a psychological and spiritual toll for isolation and fear, combined with the growth of populism, misinformation, and the propagandas, especially online. These have led to dramatic growth in hate speech, and distrust. This virus of hate is difficult to diagnose or treat. Its effects are long-lasting, and they attack the immune system of our society, our social cohesion, and our trust in our governments, our institutions, our societies, and in each other. And unless we can unite across the differences to combat these forces, we stand no chance of achieving any of the SDGs. Which brings me to SDG 17 and the reason we are here today and every day. Earlier this year, responding to the call of UN member states to empower local actors in sustainable development, KAICIID and the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers embarked on a project to map and survey the efforts of religious and traditional actors to achieve Agenda 2030. The reasons behind this project are twofold. One, a significant portion of the UN system and other intergovernmental organizations operate in contexts and regions where religious and traditional actors play a role in shaping customs, practices, and development work. As such, we are partners in policy shaping and implementation that benefit communities. Two, religious and traditional actors represent a valuable, often underutilized source of moral, spiritual, and social leadership to promote the values of sustainable development and inclusive growth. This inherent values transcend their role as development actors and is unique and extremely powerful. The findings of this project have revealed some interesting insight on how to improve the immensely important collaborations between multilaterals and religious and traditional actors, which you will hear more about. But there is one that I found most heartening, and so is the note of hope I want to end. We have to have a hope. We are witnessing a wealth of successful partnership at the grassroots between faith and multilateral actors. This is a sea change. Since only a decade ago, it points to a growing realization among UN and secular policy-making institutions of the importance of partnering with faith and traditional actors. And vice versa, faith and traditional actors are empowered to reach out to secular organizations for mutually beneficial partnerships. And we have to expand at the scale of this partnership. It's very important for all of us. This change is a result of decades of sustained work by many committed individuals, including many here with us today. The work of the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers and the Multi-Faith Advisory Council to the United Nations have been important milestones in the journey, which KAICIID has been proud to contribute to. The ministerial meetings convened over the next few days to discuss the necessary global reset on the path to sustainable development. We hope that our engagement today can highlight the vital role that faith and traditional actors can play through their networks, through their knowledge, and their wisdom and leadership. We hope that this report and this event can spark useful discussions about how these partnerships can be strengthened, renewed, and improved as the world seeks to rebuild. We stand ready to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency Muammar, for your remarks, and we're delighted to continue our collaboration with KAICIID. Now I would like to bring our moderator and leader of the next session, my good friend Owen Frazer. As you know, Owen is a known mediator, and he is currently is a mediation and negotiation advisor, providing support to Berghof Foundation's conflict transformation activities. He is particularly involved in Berghof supports to faith-based mediators. So Owen, really, he doesn't need any introduction in this particular community. So Owen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and thank you all very much for giving me this opportunity to kick off the conversation we're about to have. So particular thanks to KAICIID, the network, and UNDP for hosting this event and what I think promises to be a very interesting conversation. I won't introduce my panelists at length, as I think you'll be able to read their bio in the chat. But just briefly to remind you who we have with us. So we have Bhai Sahib, chairman of the Nishkam Group of Charitable Organizations. We have Myla Leguro, program manager of the Peace and Reconciliation Program of CRS Philippines. We have Ms. Rory Anderson, acting unit chief and policy advisor for Africa for the Strategic Religious Engagement at the US State Department. And finally, we have Samuel Rizk, head of conflict prevention, peace building and responsive institutions at the UNDP Crisis Bureau. Welcome to you all and thank you for joining us. We'll have about 40 minutes to have a conversation, and what we plan to do is sort of chunk that up into about 3 different topics. And so I will just invite you each to come in. And to kick things off, I think it'd be very interesting to hear a little bit about what religious and traditional peacemakers can contribute to, well, to building and sustaining peace. And perhaps Bhai Sahib, you could first start us off a little bit with your own reflections on this. You will need to unmute yourself.
Here we are. Thank you. I start off by saying the true essence of religion is actually seeking peace. Peace within individual selves and peace outside themselves. Violence and extremism are incompatible with the authentic spirit of religion. Religion, or dharma, as I prefer to call it, provides and empowers the faithful believers with inexhaustible trust and hope at each challenge in their lives. Religious actors are thus expected to experiment and role model peace building. Genuine religious leaders provide guidance and counsel to the congregants to prevent conflict from starting in the first place. This prevent strategy is very, very important. As we all know, all conflicts start in our own human minds. So by encouraging people to help and tame their minds as early as possible in their lives is laying the first building blocks of peace. One of the reasons that conflict takes place is when relationships break down. One's relationship with Almighty God, our families, communities, relationships with our neighbors, our human fellow beings. Religious and traditional leaders help in mending these relationships. They help build individual and community cohesion with resilience. They draw from their knowledge of traditions and sacred texts to help navigate differences, embrace and celebrate diversity, and encourage reconciliation and forgiveness. Religious communities, as a general rule, practice compassion, mindfulness, and empathy. They support poor and marginalized communities through shelter, healthcare, and educational projects. They are often the first people to be on the front line to provide humanitarian aid in crisis. We have seen this very clearly in the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, distributing food for vulnerable families, even providing oxygen and inoculating virus vaccine to help health carers. Religious actors excel in selfless volunteering in different fields to promote sustainable peace. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Bhai Sahib. I think that's a fantastic opening, reminding us how much that really peace is at the essence of what religious leaders and religious communities are all about. Thank you so much. And there at the end, you mentioned also the role of, in recent times, responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'd like to just bring in Myla Leguro here, maybe to specifically speak about your experience of also seeing the role of women of faith and young people of faith in responding to the pandemic.
Really, women and youth of faith have demonstrated their resilience and also service to others, this passion and commitment for service to others, and practicing solidarity in harnessing creative responses to address COVID pandemic, and more importantly, to nurture hope and resilience in the community. So even amidst the pandemic, women and youth of faith continue to lead, participate in public conversations and dialogue, discuss about the effects of COVID-19 in their communities. They have been engaged in monitoring the broader situation in their communities in terms of peace and security, continued to engage in social cohesion, development, peace-building efforts, and have even expanded their role to support responses to COVID-19. Concretely, some of the women in communities where we work, they continued to participate in peace-building sessions, which integrated awareness on COVID-19. They have led in monitoring the impact of the political transition and normalization efforts as components of the peace agreement here in Mindanao, the Philippines, strengthen documentation and monitoring on the effects of local conflicts in their communities, and have engaged with other stakeholders to advocate solutions and responses to effects of such incidents. They have engaged in dialogues and discussions to expand the inclusion and participation of women in peace building and governance initiatives. Even amidst economic difficulties and food insecurity, women in communities have found ways to harness local efforts, local savings and lending initiatives so that they're able to provide support and meet food and emergency needs of their families during the pandemic. Youth leaders and groups in communities where we work have also expanded their roles in their areas by directly participating in COVID-19 response in their communities. In some of the villages where we work, youth have become active members of hygiene promotion teams to support the efforts of local government to improve health of their communities and ensure their safety during COVID-19 pandemic. The main task of this hygiene promotion teams is to promote hygienic practices, with each member acting as a hygiene promoter in their community. While supporting community-based responses to the pandemic, youth leaders continue to meet to develop their youth agenda, to mainstream their priority concerns in local development plans and programs. They have led local dialogues among youth to discuss about concerns in their sector and explore solutions. They have also been able to participate and engage in local capacity building efforts so that they're able to enhance their contribution in local governance, and also led in the signing and implementation of priority projects in their communities in collaboration with local leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Myla Leguro. Very interesting to hear some real concrete illustrations of how particular religious actors are on the front lines and really responding to current crises as they come up. But what I also heard there from you very much was the leadership role that they play also in local communities. And I think this is very important to have highlighted. So thank you. Maybe to take another perspective, it would be very interesting now to hear from Rory Anderson a little bit about, from a state perspective, what are some of the benefits about empowering religious actors?
Thank you. And many thanks to today's organizers for organizing really such a timely conversation, a very momentous event. Thank you, Bhai Singh, Bhai Sahib and Ms. Leguro for your excellent points. Truly, throughout the world, religious actors really are acting locally, for religious identity is really formed inside oneself. And as religious leaders help us to form that identity, our core personal identity, religious leaders are acting locally. Ms. Leguro, thank you for your comments about how particularly women and youth are at the front lines of monitoring what is going on in our communities, really leading in COVID response to hygiene and community health work. That really is going to be what is going to help us bring us through this global pandemic. For when there are decisions made at global levels, we really know that all global decisions are acted out locally, not globally, and religious leaders act locally. As part of a robust civil society, religious leaders can help to ease the tensions that perhaps drive conflict or communal violence, and they can also be a moral voice for good governance. So just to build upon what has already been said, I think some of the real benefits of listening and empowering religious actors is really to listen to them, listen early to them, and listen often. For religious and traditional actors, as well as faith-based groups, are really vital to peace-building efforts, humanitarian response, and economic development, both globally and locally. This is because, as Ms. Leguro has said, religious actors are close to their communities, and they carry a measure of trust and credibility that may not be as readily available to either governments or secular actors, for they routinely convene their communities through religious services, projects, which can be an important platform for citizen engagement. And so this routine engagement done by religious and traditional leaders is really a vital platform to really make peace stick and hold. First, by communicating messages of peace. As Bhai Sahib says, that when people have peace in their hearts, they'll have peace in their communities and there's peace in the world. And so as religious leaders convene their communities by communicating messages of peace, that really helps to advance peace and the messages and peace building. But second, religious leaders can also get feedback from communities on what are the disruptors of peace. And again, these are the benefits of listening early and listening often to religious actors. Because they are trusted and because they are connected, religious and traditional actors really are a vital bridge between communities and policymakers. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Very much, Rory Anderson, and I like the two sides of the same coin, perhaps this kind of a dimension of listening, but also very much the role of religious actors in communicating messages of peace. And of course, as someone who works in the mediation field, I always get a warm glow when I hear people say we should be listening more. So thank you for that. And I think that takes us nicely to kind of the next topic I'd like to touch on a little bit, which is, given that there is clearly an important role played by religious actors in sustaining peace, how can other actors, state actors, the UN, support these actors in doing what they do? And I'd like to bring in Rizk from UNDP. UNDP has, I think, been at the forefront of many initiatives in terms of partnering with local actors and particularly with religious actors and faith-based actors. Perhaps you could give us a few examples of collaboration between the UN and religious and traditional actors.
Thanks very much, Owen. Hello, dear colleagues and friends. I was commenting to my colleague Nika, who facilitated this discussion, that this is a bit like a homecoming in many cases with colleagues working on religion and peace. But I'm very happy to participate, very happy to collaborate with KAICIID and the network, obviously, on making this session happen. So a couple of things on our part, and I think this builds on what we heard earlier. One is, the curiosity of the last 1.5 years is that it really undermined one of the big assets that, whether it's peace builders or religious actors have in order to address issues of conflict and peace, which is the partnership and the day-to-day interaction. And I think, like Dr. FAISAL mentioned, we're really learning how to recreate partnerships in a space where we don't actually have the ability to meet face-to-face and interact on a regular basis beyond Zoom calls. In the UN system, in UNDP, we're really trying to learn quite a bit more about what the last year has taught us, the last 1.5 years, and then where to go forward as well. So we have very similar challenges, I think, as everyone here has done. But we're really quite enthusiastic by what some of our country offices have been able to do in continuing to work over the last 1.5 years. A lot of the work that we know of and have supported and has been reported on comes from what our country offices have been doing to support religious leadership in relation to COVID responses. Quite a bit of that actually comes from dealing with misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, incitement, etc., or just overall a sense of exclusion vis-a-vis the inclusion that we heard most about. So that I think we know quite a bit about from Bangladesh, Indonesia, Iraq, Lesotho, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Sudan. All of these countries are doing this. Now, the other challenge is conflict, crisis, hate, violence has also not stopped. In many cases, it has actually peaked. And so these same country offices and others like Morocco and like Sri Lanka have also been learning to be able to continue the work of conflict prevention, social cohesion, peace building, sustaining the peace, etc., in a very, very difficult context. And I think a lot of them have been able to basically spend a lot of the political capital that they've built over years in this time where they don't have the ability to see people face to face, in a time where at a time where we're actually looking to support people, they need to also turn their attention to institutions. And I think we heard that quite importantly from Myla as well. The really key thing that has been important over the past 1.5 or 2 years, including in our own vision of what's next for prevention, peace building, and responsive institutions, is to be able to think about prevention through institutions. There are a lot of entities, partners, and others who are much better placed than we are to work at a grassroots level, at a very local level. We often do so at a national level, regional level, global level. We're part of the right kinds of networks, whether it's PARD or whether it's with the network, whether it's working with KAICIID or interagency task forces on religion and development, or the action plan on incitement, etc. So we're really good at that often. We're really good at also working at policy level. But what I think we're learning quite a bit more is how to be able to provide more support to local actors who are in many cases religious and traditional peacemakers, folks engaged in dialogue to continue the work that they are able to do. We have a couple of challenges that I'll address maybe in the next 1 or 2 questions as well, which will not be different to you, but which will not be new to this group. But I think offer a really good opportunity for us to be able to think about, what's next for a partnership among everyone interested in supporting the work on religion for peace. We all know the mantra quite well, religion as a source of conflict, but as a resource for peace. I think this is definitely a good time to rethink what that actually means, given the social distance that we have to deal with, but given all of the different opportunities that we have now because of a Zoom call to actually connect to hundreds and thousands of people rather than just wait to go on a mission and be able to connect with one country, one team, one partner at a time. So very much looking forward to the remainder of the discussion and happy to share some more as well. Over.
Thanks very much, Samuel, and great to hear about some of UNDP's experiences, but also still the challenges of really reaching down to the grassroots and supporting people at the very local level. And there I'd like to bring in Myla Leguro, maybe to just share some examples of your experience working at grassroots level and what kind of programs you've put in place with CRS to try and support these local religious actors.
Thank you, Owen. So my organization, Catholic Relief Services, we work together with Muslim, Christian, and indigenous partner organizations in designing and implementing initiatives to empower women and youth of faith as active agents of transformation and change in their communities. So some of the key strategies that we actually provide support to are the formation and strengthening of women and youth board groups at the community level so that they're able to animate and also initiate engagement of peace and governance activities in the communities. Integrated capacity building processes to build skills and confidence among women and youth, supporting women and youth to lead grassroots consultations and dialogues. And in these processes and conversations, part of what they talk about is really to define their roles in peace building and governance, map out local issues and concerns, develop their own political peace and development agenda. Key part of the process also is really engagement with key institutions and structures to advocate their participation in local decision-making processes. So while women and youth are supported with skills building in terms of political participation and civic engagement, a key component of this process is also harnessing and drawing upon their spiritual values and religious teachings to actually compel action and also inspire passion and commitment. So allow me to share some of the lessons that we've learned, especially with engaging with women at the community level. So a focus on expanding women's presence into meaningful participation rather than just women being just participants of community activities. They can be empowered to become active contributors to local decision-making processes. So it is important to move beyond passive presence of women in these processes. In areas where we work, there is significant interest and also in community will to address the inequitable representation and participation of women in institutional structures. A critical component to increasing meaningful participation and leadership is strengthening women's leadership capacity building while establishing mechanisms for women to apply knowledge and skills. It is also important to strengthen women's networks so that they're able to build influence. It is important to strategically engage men, boys, power holders, and structures to mobilize support for women empowerment efforts. And lastly, increased visibility of women's work and contributions through documentation contributes to stakeholder buy-in at various levels for increased women's empowerment, participation, and leadership, including by women themselves and also the community. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Myla, very much, and for specifically pointing out some ways in which you've been creating the space and supporting women to really claim those spaces as well, to participate in peace building activities and taking on a leadership role. I'd love again to hear also a bit about the state's perspective as a kind of member state, you know, as states are those who are really driving the 2030 agenda. Rory Anderson, could you say a little bit of what your government has done or has learned in terms of partnering and supporting religious actors?
Sure, thank you, Owen. You know, any quick scan of the news, we can see that religious intolerance and hatred are on the rise in many parts of the world. But despite these headlines, I think what Samuel just said, that religion can really be a resource for peace. In fact, I would say that religion really can be a vibrant force for peace. And so to that end, we are encouraged by the work of folks like Myla who are doing and building networks of peace. And so we are learning from our religious and traditional leaders who created networks and from our NGO partners that, and so that we are seeking to support networks that are particularly of religious leaders who are trying to advance peace. An example of that is that the US has supported a partnership with religious actors to advance mutual respect, tolerance, and partnership through the Abrahamic Faiths Initiative. This is a global network of faith leaders seeking to foster peace and mutual respect through dialogue and greater mutual understanding, working together for the common good. The Abrahamic Faiths Initiative is led by religious leaders themselves from Abrahamic traditions, from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And they seek to learn from, leverage, and elevate and build upon the previous trailblazers who've done this work before to increase respect, inclusion, and peace among faith groups, and really to counter the voices and messages of those who invoke the name of God and faith teachings to foster enmity, hate, and violence. Gatherings and networks like the Abrahamic Faiths Initiatives are an example of the value of communication over conflict. They are proof that dialogue is possible despite differences. So as I mentioned earlier, religious leaders routinely bring people together. And so we want to celebrate and partner with religious leaders like those in the Abrahamic Faiths Initiatives who are really trying to bring together people for peace. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And interesting you mentioned their networks. It's also something we at the Berghof Foundation have been involved in with the Network for Religious Traditional Peacemakers, exactly setting up a network to support faith-based insider mediators, as we recognize very much the role that they can play in kind of mediating in their communities. I'm very interested in all the reflections here about how to partner with religious traditional actors. I would be interested in the panel's reflections on what is different, right? So we hear about building networks, capacity building. I think, Myla, there you did point out about how, you know, valuing and making the most of kind of the religious resources and the you know, the teachings and so forth that religious actors bring to peace building, as it were. But have you got other experiences or kind of good practices of how to work and support religious and traditional peacemakers that is maybe a bit different than how you do it with kind of other local actors that you're seeking to support? Anyone who wants to jump in? Samuel, please.
Thanks, Owen. I think this is where we can then take a chance and, you know, among friends, be a little bit critical of our own work and then the whole field. So I think part of the discussion that we're having now is around our support to individuals, religious leaders, religious actors, etc. But I think we have to, and we do this regularly, I think, in an institution like UNDP or the UN system, where we try to figure out where is the best place to support, where is the leverage, where can we do the best. In many cases, we're often criticized for the same reason that official or traditional, you know, religious establishments are criticized. Very close to the government, we follow that particular agenda, we are distant from what is needed locally speaking. And I think we're trying to diversify, not away from that, but to appreciate that by mandate, our organization works with institutions, whether it's government or even in many cases with religious establishments, religious organizations, churches, endowments, etc. But I think we're trying to figure out how we can go beyond that. We have a particular structural challenge, so to speak, which is partnering with and supporting individuals is difficult. It's difficult to projectize for us how to support an individual, etc. And I see Rory nodding her head. I imagine that's the same for her as well. But we are creative. We're trying to figure out ways, but we all need to figure out a way to do that, I think, even more. If you just think around the last 2 years, for example, the most amount of transformational energy around the world is by social protest movements that are leaderless, so to speak. They are masses of individuals who are disaffected by politics or services or etc. And I think we need to figure out ways to be able to address this and support them in ways that don't necessarily appear as either undermining states or state institutions, but supporting real change. Religious leaders are on the forefront of that, men and women, in many cases lay, and in many cases clergy as well. That's another challenge to address and to be open about as well. But we're learning more and more how to do this, how to support youth engagements, etc. And I think some of the difficult experiences that we're seeing, for example, are around, you know, some of the entry points that are important in working with religious leaders. A lot of them around the prevention of violent extremism, work around return and reintegration for families, particularly women and children from ISIS-held territories previously, or, you know, some of these situations. And I think we are just trying to make sure that our systems match the needs. I think the way the question is phrased is, how would you advise religious and traditional leaders to work in support of the UN's work? I think really it's the other way around. How do we work to open up our systems, to be flexible, to work creatively, to support the actual work that is being done on the ground, in many cases by traditional and religious leaders. There's another thing that maybe I'll close with as well. You know, we're an organization or an entity that, you know, adheres to a set of ethics, values, norms, human rights, etc. The charter. And we often feel that we try to represent a prophetic voice. I think in many cases, we want to be able to support the prophetic voice in others. And that, I think, is the challenge, recognizing it, figuring out a way how to support it, and then figuring out how to sustain it for quite a long time, because in the projectized cycle, or in the humanitarian cycle, or in the peace process cycle, a lot of this is actually short term for the kinds of transformation that we all aspire to. So really, I think this sense of appreciating the where to recognize liberation theology, or the theology of life, in the work of others, and figuring out how to support it, and desensitizing our own organizations towards this kind of work is really the next step. Back to you, Owen.
Wonderful, thanks, Samuel. I think that's great reflections on some of the challenges, indeed, about how institutions that have their ways of working can really adapt to the realities of engaging with real people on the ground who of course, are the people we are trying to support. And there, I would really, Bhai Sahib, I would really be interested in your reflections. What are, from your perspective, some of the challenges that religious and traditional actors are facing in terms of peace building, and particularly in terms of collaborating with the UN system, but also other kinds of peace building organizations? And you'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. To my dismay, the separation of state and religion after the religious wars in Europe is still entrenched and lingers in the Western psyche. Colonialism and empire building did not help matters. The governments need to bury the past and work in solidarity with the religions. Perceived tensions between religious values on one side and the advancement of human rights on the other has fed this reluctance. Rather than using religious actors to further their own agendas and foreign policies, member states must recognize the important role that genuine religious leaders can play as mediators to help unpack and address these tensions. For this to work, however, partnerships between the UN and religious actors must be mutual and respectful. Governments often lack faith literacy. They need a deeper understanding of history, teachings, and practices of different faiths in different contexts. Religious and traditional actors often understand the drivers of conflict. As an example, over the last year in UK, faith leaders have had regular meetings with government faith minister. While this was good, this dialogue should be ongoing and not limited to when there is a crisis. Working in solidarity enables us to build common ground and deeper understanding of each other's perspective. All leaders, be they religious, traditional, or secular, need to work together. Respect for diversity is important for solidarity. We need to work more closely to rebuild our social fabric and gradually build trust. This includes tackling the disunity within religious groups themselves. As leaders, it is our responsibility to be positive role models. One issue is that men tend to dominate in many religious and traditional groups. We need to support more women and young people into leadership positions so that they can bring in their own unique perspectives. When working towards peace building, we must focus more on forgiveness and healing. This is a cornerstone of all faiths and is a vehicle for healing and sustainable peace. Our Peace Charter for Forgiveness and Reconciliation was adopted by Religions for Peace International at its 10th assembly in 2019, and we hope to build momentum around it. Investing in value-led quality education is critical to build peace in the minds of our children, to build trust, respect, and understanding of our shared humanity and our common future. Again, religion fills us with hope, or chardi kala, which translates as ascending optimism. Biodiversity collapse and mass migration, these need to be addressed as a priority. Our relationship with Mother Earth and the environment, as outlined in the Paris Agreement, is crucial. Peace and ecology are very much connected. We might even mention that violation and erosion of democratic principles can threaten peace. Right is might. Might may not be right. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhai Sahib, and thank you also, I think, for reminding us a little of the historical and structural forces that maybe have meant that this hasn't been until now really an engagement of equals on an equal basis, and that really there is a need for listening, I think, as Rory was saying, from both sides about what are priorities and interests and how can kind of common interests be found and common goals built together so that nobody feels like they are being instrumentalized. And I think you there referred a bit to the importance also really of supporting the inclusion of women and youth, which is something that Myla has been talking about. And Myla, I'd just love to hear your thoughts on what more there that the UN and member states can be doing to support women of faith and youth of faith in really participating in the peace building landscape.
Thank you. It's important to support existing efforts and mechanisms that involve women and youth of faith. So it can be intra-faith structures and platforms, or it can be interfaith structures and platforms. And a lot of these processes, institutions, key leadership would need to actually provide that enabling environment for women and youth of faith to be able to claim that leadership engagement, as what Bhai Sahib has said. It's important to recognize that efforts and mechanisms engaging women and youth of faith are often informal, organic, and more locally based. And I think Samuel talked about this. So it's really important that mapping and also understanding where they are, looking at current efforts would need to be done also at the lower level, because a lot of the processes and also contributions of women and youth are at the local level. To encourage support spaces for institutional and policy dialogue. So really pushing the challenge of moving from interfaith, interreligious engagement to more looking at policy dialogue, so that women and youth are able to actually meaningfully participate in decision-making processes and to use and harness their spiritual motivations to be able to do that. It's important to support mainstreaming of the roles, peace-building roles of women and youth, not only peace-building per se, but also in governance and development. And a key part of this process is to be able to actually support and also provide spaces to have open conversations and genuine dialogues in understanding the barriers of why women and youth are not able to meaningfully participate in development and peace-building initiatives where they are. It's important to encourage documentation, sharing of efforts, so that we're able to create visibility of women and youth work on the ground. And so that provides legitimacy and also credibility, and more they're able to push for meaningful engagement. And then lastly, it's supporting women-led and youth-led initiative. And part of what needs to be done is to explore new ways of funding, supporting and nurturing women and youth initiatives, and considering going beyond the projectized modalities, because a lot of the processes, relationships, and interactions that women and youth would do are oftentimes cannot be, I think, constrained within project modalities. So how do we actually begin to do that? And part of what I'm proposing is really to accompany the processes of engagement with women and youth in building their capacities that integrate skills in political and social engagement, at the same time still harnessing and also drawing upon their spiritual and religious values and motivations. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Myla. And I think I heard there at least some answers, I think, to the challenge that Samuel was posing about how can the UN really engage with people and not with projects. And I think there, your remarks about creating spaces, but also working through networks and platforms, and really this sort of sustained accompaniment of individuals in a process rather than jumping into kind of an institutional engagement or a project-focused logic. So thank you very much for that. Rory, I'd also just love to hear your reflections on that. What are some of the obstacles that your government's faced, and what you're thinking about how to overcome them?
Well, there are many obstacles. I'm sure Samuel and I could go on and trade stories. But I think when we're speaking about, in terms of engaging religious and traditional leaders, one of the major obstacles is that religion is increasingly being misused as a tool to mobilize and recruit individuals to engage in violence. And so there's an inherent suspicion sometimes from policymakers when you're saying, well, what about religious and traditional leaders because of that? And so when religion is politically manipulated to justify hate or exclusion, violence, and really particularly in active conflict zones, what happens is that those actors who use religion to mobilize violence, they confuse and complicate the efforts to engage and partner with religious leaders who are really trying to advance peace. And so really government at its best has to be humble and has to listen, because religious dynamics are complex on the ground. And the interplay of religion and political and economic and social factors in any conflict setting is complicated. So again, government at its best is humble, and government at its best is listening. And so again, to build upon the points that Myla has said, as well as Samuel, that when we create these spaces and these conversations like this, where we can listen to one another and dialogue with one another, both as policymakers and as practitioners on the ground, it enables all of us to listen to one another and to perhaps learn and to move the peace agenda forward. So I'm optimistic, even in spite of the obstacles, that faith institutions and religious and traditional leaders working with governments and other civil societies really have a vital role to play and can really help to increase dialogue, create those spaces of shared understanding, and so that we can move the peace agenda forward. For just as violence has been driven usually by local community grievance, I believe that peace building solutions will be driven by local community leadership as well. So again, I have nothing more to add, but thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks, Rory. And it's great to hear you're optimistic. I think actually working with, well, one of the great values of working with religious actors is also the optimism they bring to this work. And I think that's often very inspiring for all of us. I'm just conscious of the time, and I would love to take the chance to actually bring in some of the audience. We had actually lined up a couple of young peace builders to maybe just reflect on what they've heard. First, I'd just like to thank all the panel for your contributions. It's been a very interesting conversation. Thank you so much. Do we have Shafaq Sarfraz from Pakistan? Are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, welcome. Would you like to quickly introduce yourself and then perhaps share with us a comment or reflection?
Okay, sure. First of all, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my views at this forum. I am Shafaq Sarfraz, and working with UNDP Peace Builders as a young researcher from South Asia. It was really great to listen all the perspectives shared at the forum. When we talk about the South Asia, I must say the peaceful countries are critical for sustainable development, and for long, South Asia has witnessed different forms of violence affecting millions of lives. Keeping in view, especially the South Asian society's role of religious and traditional actors is very critical when it comes to peace building efforts, because we cannot build peace without engaging people which are working day in day and day out in peace building, as they have the direct access to the grassroots level. Especially when we talk about the COVID-19, this pandemic has brought with it the risk of a globalization and uncertainty of the future of many. The youth are particularly vulnerable to the panic caused by the crisis, many feelings left behind in education, economic opportunities, and health and well-being. Although young people who are over 300 million of the South Asian population have often found themselves on both sides of the fence as preparators of violence and peace builders as well. Their voices could not overcome structural hierarchies for the inclusion in peace building efforts. In South Asian societies, male youth is more impacted from political and religious marginalization and violence, and on the other hand, the female and the other genders are more affected with the getting dependency and exclusion from education, economy. So they face more inequality in different forms. Well, we cannot build peace without engaging people which are working day and night at grassroots level. So youth are one of them. Youth are the agents of positive peace and can be helpful to deal the challenges from structural and cultural issues and transform violent, oppressive, and hierarchical issues, behaviors, relationships, and attitudes into more participatory and inclusive ones. In South Asia, all countries are affected by the pandemic. Some are more than the others. Youth are among the most severely affected by this crisis, but at the same time, youth, especially the youth of faith, played very critical role in peace building and sustaining peace, and especially during COVID-19. Young people were not only diverse in their initiatives, but no doubt they are the first respondent in very positive way. When we talk about interfaith harmony, women and transgender rights, we see more acceptance among the young people who are really working on the grounds. They talk about working with young people to counter propagandas, prejudice, and giving young people opportunities to prevent them being drawn into violence. The use of powers like arts, drama, voice, music, theater, and sports as well. Supporting and caring vulnerable people, especially who are marginalized, like minorities, women, transgenders, and the children. They used to provide the youth not only provide the basic essentials, but also the informative and entertainment through the social media to take care of mental health of the people. Here, I must say the online engagement, especially the online social groups and safe spaces, help the people in a very well way in this during the pandemic. These groups are not only bring quick means of information, create linkages between people and available resources, and it helps the people in many ways, and they prove the young people with their innovative ideas are really amazing. They are working so well in their own societies. Online dialogues, activities based on videos and podcasts kept people engaged in productive ways, which actually keep the people away from very many mental health issues as well. Well, young people in their own societies have very innovative and indigenous ideas they practically used in this specific time period of the pandemic, and they try to maintain and the peace of their societies, and they create they include the young people, especially women and transgenders, in this process as well. So societies which actually were not able to connect all these, this pandemic give them an opportunity to engage all these actors of the society in the same forums. Well, at the same time, young peace builders face many problems as well. We need to consider those for the future as well, so that we can make their work more productive. Like young people's role should be more participatory. We need to let them connect with others and diverse stakeholders. Role of young people as researchers is very important, along with the practitioners. Consider them as a political actor, involve them in policy making and developing policies specified for them. Non-violent political involvement, creating space to involve them in the politics is very important. We need to create more safe spaces. equip them with relevant skills, and empower them by including them in the processes. In all these things, we must keep our rural areas, especially when we talk about the South Asian region, the rural areas are very unprivileged. We need to give more focus on them, as well as the women and the other genders, especially the transgenders, needs our more attention instead at this time. So I must say we need to reduce gaps between the mainstream policies and the rural policies as well. More important, when we talk about the religious aspect, we need to reduce gap between mainstream educational institutes and religious institutes, because they are somehow stigmatized during many years. So we need to focus on preventing violent extremism. More focus should be given on positive peace aspects, work on preventing violent extremism, as counter violent extremism is like there's a lot of work done on counter violent extremism, especially on people of faith. PV is not should happen, but there should be more work on PV, the positive aspects, rather than stigmatize specific faith-based peoples. Words can be windows as it can be the walls. Young people are agents of change, and the future leaders taking them on board will be supportive to accomplish Agenda 2030. This is from my side. Thank you for this opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shafaq Sarfraz, so much. I think you really gave us a great sense there, both of what young people are contributing, but also what they still want in terms of political participation and the kinds of issues that are important to them. And so I think, again, listening is so important at so many levels. Thank you so much. I'd also just like to take the opportunity to bring in Nyasha Freeman, if she's with us.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. My name is Nyasha Freeman. I'm, a peace practitioner who is focused on ensuring that a peaceful future begins with, engaging the next generation of leadership, which are young people. In recognition of the crucial role, young people play in creating and sustaining peaceful societies through the idea of a platform in Africa. It has accommodated us to help develop initiatives that answer the crucial interfaith challenges affecting our communities, and we have effectively utilized social inclusion and participation of youth as a strategic priority in our work. So I'm involved within the border areas of southern Tanzania and northern Mozambique through an initiative, the Youth Reflect Peace Process, working on building community resilience and preventing the spread of violent extremism through encouraging intergenerational dialogue and religious tolerance. Additionally, the project provides a platform for the Cool Imam Initiative. This is an initiative that is aimed at utilizing the soft power of religion to ensure that young people are to practices that bring harmony and also initiate intercontinental interactions, whilst these young people do learn from the successful practices that were hosted in various parts of the continent, and also giving young people the opportunity to effectively utilize the soft power of religion to build tolerance and also to erode the stereotypes that exist in our society, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where young people are not given the opportunity to, be much active in these, mainstream peace building and interfaith dialogue platforms. Hence, the process, effectively makes use of this initiative, the Cool Imam Initiative, to ensure that young people are included in the mainstream of peace building and inter-religious dialogue initiatives. Um, Initiatives also aimed at bridging the gap between religious leaders and their communities, as I earlier highlighted, and it is mainly targeted on youth and young women because mainly some religious practices and cultural norms do not allow youths and young women to be at the forefront of community initiatives. Hence, we are working to break such barriers. To date, the project is successfully established, 15 youth-led peace committees, as well as, creating offline South Kuimam publication that ensures that young people do get effective communication channels to communicate their activities and also link up with their fellows in their respective communities, and hence bring up the agents of creating some communication tools that effectively fight the spread of violent extremism along the eastern coast of Africa. Much of the success of the program pays special recognition to IDAF's intercontinental approach, which has fused in various youth players across the continent and has allowed a learning process across regional contexts and countering the spread of violent extremism across national borders, especially in these ungoverned border areas, especially like now in southern Tanzania, northern Mozambique, and eastern Malawi, where early signs of violent extremism are emerging. So this gives the opportunity for those young people who are not well informed to effectively link up with initiatives occurring across the continent and also across the world, and also deriving various lessons from these platforms and ensuring that they effectively benefit from these practices. And it is not a surprise that in November 2019, Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers and the Asian Muslim Action Network, AMMAR, collaborated to bring the IDAF project to Southeast Asia, hosting the first Intercontinental Youth Forum in Jakarta. The forum managed to bring together young change makers to develop innovative social cohesion solutions that resonate with youth in the South and Southeast Asian region. This ingenuity of young leaders who participate in this forum demonstrates the great potential of our next generation to bring about a more peaceful and inclusive society. It is through such feats that as a young peacemaker, I'm so motivated to make sure that we continuously engage on various platforms and also special thanks to Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers for creating platforms that ensure that youth voices are adequately channeled to various policy making platforms, because now the norm is instead of young people being represented on the policy table, there is need to include them in the policy making process, because this is a feat given how the youth bulge is growing across the world and how they are taking part in various aspects of the societal activities, either as peace builders, some as perpetrators of violence, some as informers to various government initiatives, and some equally, paying a deaf ear to all the, issues going around, them in their communities. Hence, it is very important that young people do also get the opportunity to be effectively active also. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nyasha. Once again, I think providing us with a host of examples of how young people are really playing a crucial role already in peace building, but also interesting there that both of you highlighted the real desire for young people to be more involved in policy making and in the political process. And I think wonderful to hear how exchanges across continents can really inspire people with new ideas, experiences from elsewhere, and the value of these kind of exchanges. And I think that's definitely a message we'll all be taking away, is that these kind of meetings and exchanges are really valuable for those people who are working on the ground. We have a couple of minutes left. All of those of you who have been listening patiently for the last hour and a half, no doubt when you first signed up, you kind of thought, well, I'm signing up here for a reason. What is it I want to know about this topic? If you feel your question has not been answered in the last hour and a half, please fire your question into the chat now, and we'll see if our panelists can answer it, or stick your hand up and we'll invite you to say it in your own words. And when I say stick your hand up, it will have to be an electronic hand because I can't see all of you. Yes, Christine McMillan, please.
Yeah. I was very interested in what Samuel Rizk had to say about social protesting movements. And I'm wondering if that's something we need to look at some point, as it can form some great articulated conviction, but it can also lead to violence. And I think of even the two phrases side by side: religious actors, social protesting movements. Maybe we need some social protesting movement actors on some of these calls to help understand what is happening and how we can contribute with a peace sense of engagement.
That's a great question, Christine, and inspires me already. I'm aware at Berghof we'd have lines of work both on social protest movements and on religious actors, and now I think we'll definitely need to get those people into the same room and the same conversations. I'll throw that to the panel. Does anyone have any reflections on that? Samuel.
Thanks, Christine. So my comment prompted a more difficult question, so I'll try to answer a little bit. So the phenomenon of social protest movements having basically engulfed almost 80% of the world, over the last 2 or 3 years, has undoubtedly given an opportunity for us, even in the UN system, to figure out what to do with that. So last year, early, we actually developed, particular guidance for our country teams. Some of that is communication related, and some of that is actual policy and program related, because a lot of the folks that actually signed up to be working in these countries didn't necessarily sign up for this particular thing. They signed up for normal development programming in many cases. You manage a 5-year plan, you manage partnerships, etc. But this is a little bit of a new phenomenon, even by political standards. So like I said, I think we're trying to figure out how to deal with it from a communication and advocacy part, and how to do it programmatically. I think it is important for all of us to walk a little bit of a fine line, but maybe particularly for us as a member state organization, to not appearing as siding with a social protest movement against the government, and not appearing to be silent when actual change is warranted. Otherwise, we're completely outside of what we believe in terms of human rights, ethics, etc. When we write up 5-year plans or 4-year plans for a country program for UNDP in a country, the most recent one I know of is Armenia, approved 3 or 4 weeks ago. The 4 big words that stand out are 4 big words that us religious leaders and others are really important. So these folks are writing into a member state approved document, a vision for Armenia, and this is online, so I'm not betraying a secret here. A vision for Armenia for the next 4 years, given the recent issues and fighting with the neighbors. A vision for Armenia that is cohesive, inclusive, just, and resilient. If these are not 4 words that we can agree on together as a member state entity, as a state, as religious institutions, then I'm not sure what we can agree on if those aren't framing enough for us. So that I think is important. Maybe, Owen, just 2 or 3 takeaways from this particular session is this re-energized community around opportunity and around hope. Being given an opportunity remains a critical issue. Without opportunity, there is hopelessness. With some opportunity, and all of us can help, there is hope. And secondly, I think what we have learned over the last 1.5 years, maybe slightly longer, is to be able to accept and tolerate and take more risk. Very difficult for an organization, but we have to do it. And if any one of us is looking for a religious source for this, look no further than Ecclesiastes 11:1, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will see it again in a few days. This is the kind of risk that I think we need to take collectively, particularly on youth, and we need to tolerate it, we need to manage it, we do not need to transfer it to others, but we also need to own part of that risk. And I think the promise of what is possible is positively outweighs what might be negatively coming from taking some of these risks on some of the youth that I think a number of colleagues mentioned. Over.
Wonderful. Thank you, Samuel. And thank you for those takeaways. I will not attempt to sum up any further. We are unfortunately out of time. So I would just like to thank very much Rory Anderson, Bhai Sahib, Myla Leguro, and Samuel Rizk for sharing their reflections and experiences with us. And I would just now hand over to Siam from the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers to close this event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Owen, and thank you to all the speakers for joining us, and also to the audience for this 1.5-hour long discussion. Just a quick point on next steps. First, we will share a summary of the event in the coming days. Second, we have produced an outcome document, which my colleague Rachel just shared in a chat with you all. This outcome document, as was mentioned in the beginning, was our preparation sort of for this high-level event. It was through survey and workshops that we had worked on with KAICIID and UNDP. And third, as Dr. El-Sanusi mentioned in the very start of the event, our aim for this gathering originally was an in-person advocacy sort of mission, that we would bring local actors to the UN and give them that space where they can engage with policymakers and other member states. And going forward, what we aim to do is, this is something that we would like to continue, hopefully next year, pandemic permitting, that we will bring actually these very local actors to the UN. And hopefully we will continue doing this for the years to come. I think it's very clear from our side that we are very much committed and we remain committed to empowering local actors. We believe that local actors are the agents of change when it comes down to the 2030 Agenda's promise. And we hope to keep that promise considering with this current pandemic and everything that has happened. With that, I thank you all for joining us. Again, Owen, thank you so much for moderating this discussion. I know it's one of those tasks that it's kind of difficult, but you've done a wonderful job. I thank you again for that. And also,
always a pleasure.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Congrats. Bye. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.